In today's fast-paced real estate landscape, success demands more than surface-level expertise. It requires insight, adaptability, proven strategies, discipline, and the ability to take risk. The Agent Brew podcast blends candid conversations with wisdom from industry leaders who've walked the path before you. Think of us as your strategic pit stop to fuel your real estate journey. From the crossroads of the world in the heart of Times Square, welcome to Agent Brew Executive Sessions. I'm your host, Eric Zollinger of Realty Co. Aloha to our viewers and listeners as we have a very special episode of Executive Sessions today. We're having casual conversation with the leaders of brokerages where they share their insights and strategy, discuss current topics and challenges facing our industry. I'm grateful and honored to have as today's guest, Matthew Beall, the founder and principal broker of Hawai'i Life Real Estate Brokers, where he started in May 2008, and under his leadership, the company has grown to over 100 brokers and agents across 5 offices in Hawaii. And as CEO, he has played a key role in expanding the brokerage through significant acquisitions. Matt is also the chairman of the board for Forbes Global Properties. Welcome, Matt. Glad to have you.
Aloha, Eric. I'm happy to be here. Thanks so much.
So I always like to start with how my guests and I know one another, and you were such a gracious host at the Four Seasons Forbes Global Properties third conference last December.
Thanks. It was a lot of fun. I'm glad everybody was able to make it.
I mean, talking about a beautiful space, but just the content, what you guys were able to curate and put together, I'm still amazed and thinking through a lot of those, especially AI conversations that blew everyone's mind.
Yeah, it's that was sort of inspired by a conference that we do and we've done for years. Or the next one's coming up in November here, also on Maui at the Four Seasons. It's called the Workshop Series, and that was the first year for Forbes Global Properties that we invited the entire network to come, and it's challenging for a global organization because it kind of doesn't matter where you put a pin on the map. Someone's going to have to fly halfway around the world, but it was so great to have so much representation, really from all over the globe, and you could see that kind of sprinkle of content, me in the background, suggesting these speakers, and it was good. I always, especially for a workshop, my running joke is that, like, if we leave people with a question mark floating over their head, that's usually a good thing. And so that was a little more inside baseball, obviously, because it's a, kind of intra-network conversation and content. But with Workshop, we get the privilege of swinging pretty wide from a content perspective.
That's great. So, why don't we start with your elevator pitch? Tell us about your company today, and then we'll talk about your origin story after that.
Sure. Well, you covered some of it. So and just worth noting, I'm no longer the principal broker. Last year, I still have kind of a pixelated memory from COVID. So last year or the year prior, I hired our first principal broker that isn't me. But I'm still the CEO, and we are the largest independent firm, just in as much as we're not a franchise, and we're locally owned in Hawaii. We're across 5 islands. Right now, today, we're about 270 or so agents and 51 staff. We have a very large property management business as well. We manage close to 800 homes around the state. About half of those are short-term rentals. And yeah, I mean, it's been a bit of a wild ride. I mean, it's crazy to think that it's been 17 years because it in many ways feels like like 2 years. And I always have this kind of like, we're just getting started, but we're, among the top selling firms in the States. We're much smaller in terms of agent count than, any of our nearest competitors. And it's not really we're not organized around being number anything. I mean, we really are the kind of culture and ethos in the company is just put our heads down and do good work and let that work speak for itself. but I think like right now we're number 1 or 2 or somewhere in that in the sales volume. And then we'll see how that shakes out. But yeah, it's a great company and a really I shouldn't take all the credit because it's certainly a co-created. It's just a lot of talent and a lot of really impressive salespeople and leadership. And it's been an awesome run.
Well, unlike other states where you can just easily take a car to your other office, a couple
Right.
hours,
Yeah.
having 5 islands and it's 5, correct, or is it 4?
It's 5.
Um,
Yeah, we're on 5.
it's 5, yeah. And so having an office on a different island, it's not like you can just get in a car.
Yeah.
So how does that work? Is really every office almost like its own entity, or are you able to really blend it back and forth with agents doing more than one island?
Well, the agents, unless it's really in the top tier of the market, agents will specialize, either on their island or on their particular region of the island. But it is, to your point, it's extraordinarily challenging in as much as we have this kind of forced distribution. We're separated by, hundreds of miles of water. And so I'm in the air a lot. I was on Oahu in Honolulu the last couple of days. And, I think from a kind of culture standpoint internally, it's so important that we do our best to kind of try to get people together and try to, not leave people feeling like they're on a proverbial island. I mean, despite the fact they are actually on an island, but, and so we're not really organized around offices per se. When we started, right after the iPhone came out. So we never even had like landlines. And we were always kind of digital first and really everything was, in the cloud anyway. So we're really quite tech heavy. We were like a creative agency that got into lead generation and then kind of parlayed that into market share. But, I think in as much as each island has its own kind of culture and style and feel, the agents certainly represent that. And it's really expressed and they're it's Hawaii is sort of sweetly provincial. And what I mean by that is that we all feel like our town and our island is the best.
It's the best, right?
It's not, I wouldn't quite call it competitive because there's a general appreciation for all of Hawaii, but we're proud and we express that and it's despite the separation and just the general challenges of being independent contractors and kind of being spread out, I find it to be a remarkably cohesive and collaborative group. And that's a voyage and not a harbor. It's like you got to kind of stay in that and really do our best to feed it. But it's really sweet, and it's awesome to see that kind of expression at the level of every employee, every agent. So I think internally, from a culture standpoint, that's really the thing that distinguishes us is kind of how we represent this place and each other and the practice.
So the staff of 51, is it that is office life important to your agents, or is
No.
it something where it's just? I mean, you mentioned you started after the iPhone started, and I'm just like, wow,
Yeah.
that's incredible. I started in '99 with the Palm Pilot, so
Right.
that's quite different.
Yeah, I mean, I'm speaking mostly for the company. I mean, I started my career in the late 1900s, but I think because we were, like I say, kind of tech heavy, and at that time, especially, so much of the industry was gravitating towards the internet. We were like a portal in Hawaii before there was Zillow or Realtor or those things really expressed in Hawaii anyway. So we were one of the first companies to really aggregate all 3 MLSs and put all their data in one place and kind of share it with public record data and really kind of just open the kimono for the consumer. And so that drove a lot of traffic, and we were, really, really great at lead generation and of course that landscape across the country and elsewhere and just the world of tech and online lead gen has changed pretty dramatically since 2008. But from a kind of office culture standpoint, we were never really like, the model was not, okay, we're going to open an office in a high traffic, retail location and expect people to walk in the door. It's not to say that we don't have some of those locations now. And interestingly, I think after the pandemic, it almost felt like the consumer kind of wanted that more. They wanted that personal interactivity. But I wouldn't categorize us as being like, kind of office focus. Now, granted, those 51 employees, many of them are distributed across the state as well. But, when it comes to things like property management or accounting, that requires infrastructure, and you got to like get the mail and, be online and all that stuff. So we certainly have that. But I think that the salespeople in general, say for those really high traffic retail locations, they know the drill. I mean, our clients are coming from all over the world, and they're all spread out, and it's a very kind of, it's a little tropey to say, but it's a very high lifestyle kind of market. And so they're out in that life and living it, with their clients.
So what would you say is the biggest challenge facing your agents today?
I think the shift after the pandemic, where, in Hawaii, the pandemic kind of broke nearly every record there was to break in terms of, transaction volume and frequency and pace, and just, it's like everything that could sell sold, and then we had a lot of people move to Hawaii during that time, many of whom were sort of pre-wired, or some of them were coming home, which is really sweet, but it was a big, big influx. And then, the rates went up, and you had this kind of rate lock effect. And there was, from about the middle of 2022, this kind of relative stagnation in the market, where the transaction volume was really down. And then after a few years, you started to see a pretty dramatic spike in listing inventory. So right now, today, we have in some markets like a record high listing inventory, and not really the corresponding activity. Save for the kind of luxury and ultra luxury markets, which we have the great privilege of being, having a lot of market share in those spaces. The transaction volume is quite low for Hawaii. And so we've gone from this shift of being, running around like crazy, to a kind of lull in the market. And then now representing a lot of sellers who are, of course, they want activity and feedback and transparency in the sales process. And so, that's a lot of kind of listing management, so to speak. So, I'm generalizing, but not by much. I think that shift of, focusing now on this great amount of inventory and how we represent it, and how do we, take their interest in it to heart, along with, relatively low transaction volume just statewide. That's kind of probably the biggest challenge we're facing.
Is the impact of the fires, is that still
for sure
impacting the market?
No question. And that's part of why, I mean, just from a purely economic standpoint, why we wanted to host the Forest Conference and now Worthshop on Maui. It's just, Maui can use every dollar they can get. But the sort of economic impacts of that, and the ripple effect, and the just prolonged recovery, it's going to take some time. And that it isn't just on Maui. I mean, obviously it's felt more intensely on Maui, but that impacted the entire state. And so, yeah, that's a big lift. There's no question.
Got it. So let's go back to your start. How did you get started in real estate, and why?
Wow. So when I first moved to Hawaii, I was I was hired to be the food and beverage manager at a resort that was opening after a hurricane. And so, that's very hard work. It was very easy to burn out. And,
so you're not from Hawaii?
No, I grew up in Georgia, and then kind of kept moving west. I went to school in Virginia, and then in Montana, and then I moved to Hawaii in 1994 from Montana. And started that job, and it was great as a young man. It was a great exposure, and it was, a lot of work. And I kind of quickly burn out of the just the hours and the intensity of that. And I then went on what I thought was going to be a surf trip to Australia. And that became a 2-year kind of backpacking trip around the world. And I came back to Hawaii, and this is now, kind of late 1997.
Mhm.
And got back into restaurant work because it's just what was easy to do. And a lot of the people that I worked with at the resort prior had gotten into timeshare sales, and they were making a lot of money. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. Maybe I could do that. And so I went and got my real estate license. And about halfway through the school, I realized, yeah, I'm not gonna be selling timeshare. And I kind of honestly just really didn't know what to do, and was pretty green. And I went with a couple of friends to a local sushi restaurant, and there was a woman there at the bar, and we were like, this is the day that I passed the test and had my license, and she says, well, you should go talk to this company that just opened up. I'm sure they'd hire you. And so I thought, okay. And I literally just on Monday walked in the door. I didn't interview I didn't even know to interview other firms, and I just started there. And this was 1998.
Mhm.
And I had a, pretty successful first couple of years. It was a lot of hustle and a lot of work ethic. And, I was still very, very green.
But you weren't from there, so how did you manage to become so successful, like, right out? Is it just pure hustle, or was it the contacts from your restaurant days?
No, it was, I started in a resort community. So there was a lot of visitor traffic, and, it was relatively transient, just in terms of people buying and selling. And this was after we kind of went through the dot-com boom, and but things were then much more affordable. Um, and it was a lot, yeah, it was a lot of hustle. It was a lot of, open house and floor time, and really predominantly working with buyers. And then after a few years, I was recruited away to, I got my broker's license as soon as I could, which in Hawaii was 3 years. Um, I was recruited away to run a shop for a Realty franchise at the time, which was the largest company in the state. And I was in my hometown in Kilauea. And then I started I started buying and selling. I was kind of a small time, developer and flipper. And as that scaled up, because I was exchanging into, each new project, I then ended up, I had a full-time construction crew, and was really actively, buying, foreclosed properties, or things at the courthouse steps, or things that were otherwise kind of in need of repair. And it's amazing. I look back on that thinking, how in the world did I do all that? Because from 2001 to about 2007, I think I did like 33 transactions personally, which is crazy. And I was not, I was it was very short term. I was not, kind of in it for the long run. But, as you can imagine, I always joke, like, I had 7 mortgages in 2007. So I was a very precarious position, and I was incredibly fortunate to, have exited at that time. And also, practicing as both a broker in charge with a
Mhm.
roster of agents, and as a salesperson, which is really a freakish
And
overlap.
developer too. I mean,
Yeah, and
that's
a
a lot of
developer, yeah.
hats.
Yeah, and so in 2008, um, when we started Hawai'i Life, like I mentioned, it was kind of a portal. It actually wasn't a real estate company originally. It was literally just a portal, and they were effectively selling leads, selling inquiries to realtors all around the state. And I was hiring them, before it was a real estate company, to sell my product. So I was like an advertiser on the site, and it was effective. It worked. Um, and then, we kind of realized that it really needed to be a brokerage. And so, with my now former partners, we turned it into a brokerage, and this is the peak of the recession. And, as it turned out, when times are hard and there's not a lot of activity, if you're able to move the needle at all, people take notice. And so we really garnered a lot of interest from both sellers and from brokers all around the state. And that led to, a lot of growth and a lot of market share, frankly, quicker than I think we were prepared for. So in many ways, feel like I have kind of a forced MBA and just the whole slog of it. And then too, like I said, the kind of landscape of, just tech and everything, has changed obviously a lot since then. And so the evolution of the company changed along with that. But we started on Kauai and then went to Hawaii Island, which is on opposite end of the state, but they're run by the same MLS. And
interesting.
Then Maui in 2009, or I think, yeah. And then Oahu, maybe a year or two after that. And so, yeah, it's just been a very crazy run. And to your point, I mean, we actually we've only done a few, what I'd call proper acquisitions where we've, acquired companies. We have also done a lot of, what I'd call like absorptions or walkovers where, you have these kind of mid-sized to smaller shops that are run by, really effective salespeople that have kind of, a team underneath them. And we found very quickly that, if we can take the kind of logistics and the back office stuff and really, apply kind of where we're really strong to those operations, then those salespeople, who are like either the matriarch or the patriarch of that company, they all of a sudden, will double or triple their sales because they're not thinking about like their, insurance policy or their copy or whatever. And then I think what happened is, as we did that, like the local press, despite me saying until I'm kind of blue in the face that like we didn't buy this company, it was really more of like a absorption, or they would print, Hawai'i Life acquires, whatever, Troy International or something. And then I start getting all these calls from people like, hey, if you're buying brokerages, and so it was kind of this interesting parlay. It was probably good for business development, but again, it was a little more along the lines of like, put your head down and do good work, and then people will take their own notice. And it you can only do so much. And so it was like, I'm sure we misfired in some places or lost out on opportunities because we're focused on other things. But by and large, we've had, really incredible success in parlaying those opportunities and welcoming those, those people into the fold. And we're ironically, we're not a very big recruiting company. We just don't, it's just never really been a focus of ours. But, from a business development standpoint, if you can kind of win the hearts and minds of those real top selling brokers just by getting your own results, then of course that, that pays
people will seek you
dividends
out
in the future, of course. Yeah.
So any particular mentors that you would like to call out or mention?
Oh my gosh. How much time do you have? I mean, I'd be remiss if I didn't name Neil Norman, who's, in most years, the top selling broker in the state. So he and I worked together and his firm in between these periods where when I was leaving that Realogy franchise, I went to work with him. He had started a very high-end boutique, and I ended up going back to, at the time of all things, was a Century 21 franchise. But the only reason I did was because I had, hired all of those people, and I had all this inventory that I needed to sell. And he was in this, very small shop that was really, really high end. And then fast forward, when we started Hawai'i Life, he was literally the first person to call me and to like, hey, what are you doing? And so in 2009, we acquired his company, which was one of those kind of, it was really a small group, kind of ultra luxury focus. And he and I have been, close friends and just throughout the years, and he's been with us the whole time. And I think he has such an innate kind of sales capacity, and, he's 30 plus years into the business. So he definitely, falls into that category. He would probably say the same about me, but from a totally different, different lens. Um, you know, more recently, in the last, say, 5 years, Ken Jacobs in Australia, who's on our board at Forest Global Properties, he is just a freak of nature and just incredibly wise. And he's somewhat antithetical, I think, to the kind of, he's just not what you'd expect in as much as it's a very small shop. It's hyper focused on ultra luxury. He sets the record every year and for however many
It's impressive
years in
what they're
Australia.
able to accomplish. I mean, I was
It-
just
it's,
amazed at what they were presenting.
yeah. And I mean, he's on the short list of people that it's pretty rare that I have a conversation with him where I don't end up writing down something that he says, because it's just so like, oh my God, say that again. Like it's just so juicy. And then, along the way I have a close friend who was the chief operating officer for a very large firm in Honolulu that is now running a mergers and acquisitions firm, not just for real estate, but for, all kinds of firms in Hawaii and elsewhere. And, I just think he's brilliant, and he's always been a great advisor to us. And, they're out there. There's a long list of people that I kind of sponge off of.
So over your career, any particular wins, and why are they important to you?
Oh, sure. So many. I mean, I think, we've done a lot of very significant private transactions in Hawaii that, unfortunately I can't really talk about. But they were quite complicated and, really, really intense at the time. And to have the kind of capacity and teamwork and resources required to not just earn that business, but also effectively, transact and make all that work. As there's a handful of those that are they're incredible accomplishments and really, really special. So, and it's, I know it's a little bit kind of tropey to stand on these big transactions, but when they're that significant and that complicated, it just feels like such a win. I mean, I'd in a weird way, I'd also put the Workshop series in there. I mean, and the only reason I say it's weird is that, the ethos of that conference series was, we're 2,000 miles from anywhere. And often we would be invited to go speak at, an Inman conference or T3 or something. And it's lovely. And there's a lot of insight and a lot of ideas and a lot of talent in the room, but you'd look around and there's no one from Hawaii there. And for, totally understandable reasons. And so we thought, okay, well, what if we kind of flip that on its head and, host a kind of, industry event in Hawaii and bring those speakers and that talent and those ideas here. And, it's strange in as much as that, like, it's certainly not a profit center. It's, if anything, it's horribly expensive, but it's very fulfilling because it's one of those kind of, and it's, we invite everyone to come. So all of our colleagues, all of our cooperating brokers, everyone kind of around the profession. And so it has this kind of rising tide quality that is really fun. And I think the privilege of kind of curating that content is also really special. I mean, it's this extraordinary amount of work. And sometimes I wonder, like, am I just a masochist? Like, why am I doing this? But it does kind of, it is really fulfilling, and it helps kind of hardwire a lot of relationships. And because I think real estate it's one of the few professions where it's just inherently collaborative. Like, you need your competition, and you need those relationships to be successful. And if you can, really strengthen those and set the stage for, a lot of success, then it's beneficial. And so that's kind of what that's all about.
We just sell real estate on the side, right? It's really, we're in the relationship business.
1,000%. Yep.
I just have to say that the Worth Shop, I have a lot of friends that, or several friends that have talked about it, and they're so excited to attend. And I'm like, oh, I wish I could go, because that coincides with the Real Deal in South Florida, and
Oh, wow.
we're a big sponsor there. So I'll be there, unfortunately, but it's something that I hope, and
You'll be
for future
missed.
events, that I'm able to come. So
It'll be good.
certainly wish you so much success on that.
Thank you.
You obviously work very hard and for many years. Do you have time to do anything outside of real estate? Are
Oh,
there
for
any
sure.
sports or any?
Yeah, I'm really I you know I think it's part of it is living in Hawaii, but it's I'm really disciplined about I'm not quite sure I'd call it work-life balance as much as just, you know, just being boundaried around it and thinking about like my kind of running line I tell people is like, if you pick up a weight and you just kind of do bicep curl and you just keep doing that, eventually you're going to atrophy. Like you just can't do it forever. Like if you don't rest, it's like, and I think sometimes we get focused on, on the work part, on the contraction part, and not enough on the rest part. And it's a one thing. It's like if you don't sleep, you're not going to perform very well. And I think that holds for, every kind of activity. And so, I surf, I play music, it's just living in Hawaii, we're in the water a lot. So in the summer, especially when there's not as much surf near where I live, I'll go paddle or swim or, I had a really close friend of mine visiting and we went up to Kokei, which is like the mountains of Kauai, and, did a really incredible hike, and we're out under the stars for a lot of the time. So, I mean, that's just part of life in Hawaii. Like you're outdoors a lot, and it's very integrated.
Automatically recharges you as you're just doing your
Totally.
regular activities.
Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah.
So let's play the gratitude game. This is rose, thorn, bud, but because we are the Agent Brew, we like to throw a little bit of coffee in there. So
Okay.
we start with the aroma. So it's basically that fresh coffee brewing in the morning. What gets you out of bed? What motivates you?
Well, right now today, a lot of my focus is on, a couple things, both Worth Shop and then a bunch of new initiatives that we're launching as a company really literally the day prior. Because what we do is we have an internal day where we it's the only time that we get the whole company together in person. And so I don't know when this is going to air, but I don't want to give away too much, but we've got a lot of really cool stuff coming. And so there's a lot of background work to get all that ready. And it's, project management and just getting alignment for our whole team. So those two things are really, taking my focus, and it's kind of where the pull comes from. And the creative part of Worth Shop is always fun. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that isn't fun about it, but like I said, the content creation, the kind of the planning and the flow of it, and thinking about, who's coming, it's a lot of work, but it's also fun and it's inspiring.
So the next part is the brew. What brings you deeper joy or satisfaction? It's that first full cup of coffee. One might say, what is your why?
Wow. I think that voyage that I was mentioning earlier of like the constant pursuit of kind of the culture in the company, and the way in which we, represent this place and each other and the profession. And there's different iterations of that. So, like I was on Oahu in Honolulu yesterday with a group of agents from around the state. And, those interactions are always really special. And any time you can get, especially people from different markets together to kind of share their why and just even their challenges, it just is this kind of very self-feeding, environment, because as it turns out, the markets around the state are quite different. And so, you just pick up these little details from each other, and all of that kind of feeds culture and creates that vulnerability and that kind of sharing capacity. So I think the expression of, our internal culture and, to a broader degree, the brand is very much about that. And it's this kind of relationship culture in Hawaii and that very proud independence. So that's kind of, it's a little esoteric, but it's like, that's the driving force in the background. Yeah, I mean, sometimes, like to your question earlier, we have the opportunity to get involved in these really large transactions. And, as those come about, and depending on who the players are, those can be really, hyper focused and inspiring, and it's all high stakes and a little stressful, but
Right.
also like, okay, I'm gonna get after it, so that's fun.
So, turning it to like the thorn or the coffee grinds, anything frustrating you currently at the moment, or an obstacle you're trying to work through?
I think, I don't know if you ever watched the show Billions, but sometimes I feel like the
It's
win.
one of my favorite shows. Oh my gosh. Oh wow. Yes. Yes, I know
Sometimes
it well.
I feel like the Wendy character in that show. It's like the talent management of, helping all of us navigate the pretty dramatic shifts in the market, and the changes in the way in which we have to behave, and the changes to our kind of divisions of labor, and the what the work looks like. And so, a lot of that right now is uh, trying to imbue the whole sales process with enough transparency on behalf of our sellers to just explain the market dynamics and what's really happening, and what our best advice is for them. And it's challenging. I mean, it's the work to be done, but it's definitely the challenging.
Well, thanks for that great um description of um
Sure. Yeah.
Billions is one of my favorite shows, and so that was just so spot on. And
Yeah.
thank you for that. I'm probably gonna have to go back and rewatch it from the beginning now, since I miss it so much. Uh, so then the last part is the fresh beans. Obviously, you talked about the Worth Shop. That's something
Yeah.
that's upcoming. Would you say that that's what you're most looking forward to? That's what's next.
I think that in the very near term, that's a big one. But I also think the part of what we're creating inside the company is going to help really scale so much of our work, and also get us a little more focused on what I really personally believe is our actual product. And it's not to say that, we don't have a product in tech, and all these other kind of, tools that we then take to market. But when it really comes down to it, I think the kind of brand and the culture expression of who we are and how we represent, the properties we're hired to sell, or this place, that really is the most important thing. And I think, come November, we'll have the stage set so much better for that, because of all these things we're working on in the background. And that is super exciting to me, because, what happens, I'm sure every real estate broker owner goes through this, but, when the transaction volume subsides and you end up with a lot of inventory, the division of labor is pretty dramatic. So like my creative team kind of can't see straight, because all they're doing is managing the collateral and the marketing on behalf of all this inventory that we're representing. And the agents are sort of sitting there like, where is everything? What's going on? And that's almost the exact opposite of what was happening during the pandemic, where everyone was running around with their heads cut off, and it was like all this business happening at the same time. And it's this kind of money, no money dynamic, where they weren't really prospecting or marketing or thinking about developing new campaigns, because it was all they could do to keep up with the business. And so I think what we're correcting for is both freeing up the creative team, providing scale for the agents in ways that are going to be very dramatic. And it's not to say we don't have it now. It's just look at, every incremental step that you can make, and the parlay that you get from that. If you have one new tool that actually gets adoption, let alone a handful, then all of a sudden, you really can move the needle. And I think for us, moving the needle is that expression of culture and expression of brand, and really what distinguishes us, which is that we are an independent firm in Hawaii, which really matters in Hawaii, as it turns out, just because, our decisions are made here. They're not made in New Jersey or New York, or pick an offsite location. And we don't have the kind of headwind of trying to convey to a, franchise company that like, hey, that's not how it works here. Or yeah, we're not really going to like winterize our homes, or, whatever those kind of
Right.
dynamics are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So where do you see the company in 5 years, and yourself?
Oh goodness. Well, if the previous 5 is any indication, it probably won't be super different. I mean, just because it'll go by in like 20 minutes. But I think there's a fair bit of consolidation happening. So there's opportunity for, for growth that may come our way in any number of channels. That could be, more kind of absorption, acquisition. It could be really growing our property management world. There's a lot of business development opportunities. And if those hit, that'll, kind of widen the aperture of everything. And all that said, we're not really focused on, like I said, being number anything. We don't have this kind of, we're going to be here by then, we just don't operate that way.
You just want to do the work.
Yeah. And I think, if I'm sure we will grow organically and enroll a lot of, great talent. It probably won't be, it's en masse, we're not going to suddenly become a whatever franchise or go do some, massive deal. But I think, as the market does its shifts in the next 5 years, we'll lean into that and we'll get the benefit of that. And the company will probably look slightly different, but also, very much the same. And I think we'll be even more expressed, which is awesome. I mean, that's all I could ask.
It's great. So we've come to the part of the show where it's my favorite, because if you could give your young agent self a piece of advice, Matt, what would it be?
Well, gosh, I got so much good advice that really, really kind of set the course of my career in so many brilliant ways. But I think probably, get off of the kind of relevancy bus. And what I mean by that is that I think, this business is so manic and it ebbs and flows in such a way that, like, when it's ebbing, you kind of personalize it and you make it about you. And, you go, like, you wake up unemployed and you're like, when am I ever going to do business again? And it's like, that's really silly if you think about it. Like I think we tend to forget how much, we've learned and how much we've grown and how our capacities have really increased, and the quality of the advice that we're hired to give really goes up. And so, of course, more people are going to be interested in that. And it's like, yes, you're going to do another deal, like, shocker. But just getting off of that kind of mental loop of, is this okay? What's going to happen? And just realizing that, it does all kind of flatten out, and that you can set it up in such a way that it actually is less manic and a little more fulfilling and kind of stable, and just not to get caught in that loop. That's probably where I would go.
Great. So I always like to end with a positive quote. And so I actually have a card here that's full of many different ones, because I like to hear how the conversation goes. And with your last comment, it solidified why I'm going to use this next one. It's by Oprah Winfrey.
Okay.
So, challenges are gifts that force us to search for a new center of gravity. Don't fight them. Just find a new way to stand. Challenges are gifts that force us to search for a new center of gravity. Don't fight them. Just find a new way to stand.
I love it. I think it's great.
So,
go
with
Oprah.
that, Matt, thank you so much for being a part of Agent Brew Executive Sessions. I look forward to seeing you, I guess, in a couple weeks in Florida at the Forbes Global Properties event in West Palm Beach. It's been really great chatting with you today, and we'll check in again in a future season to see how things are going. But thanks again for coming on.
No, it's my great pleasure. Thank you so much for your time, and I'll see you early October. It's coming right up.
Yes, you will. So thank you to our viewers and listeners. Aloha. And I'm Eric Zollinger, your host, reminding you it's a great day for real estate. The Agent Brew podcast is brought to you by RealtyCo. RealtyCo is your partner in real estate, bringing you game-changing benefits and services to empower your business. Visit realtyco.com for more information.